I don't care what your boss says. You're not a number. You're not a piece of data. You're not a performance metric. You are a human being. So if you're ready to stop being a cog in someone else's wheel, it's time to step up, live life, and by the way, have a little fun along the way. Press that subscribe button and take this conversation to heart. It could change everything. Hello, everybody. It is chilly outside, but it is warm here in the Myth Slayer Café. There is a hobbit hole where my special guest, Nick Rayburn, is sitting. Nick, it's good to have you here at the Myth Slayer Café with that cool little window behind you. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Hi, Scott, and thanks for having me on. Yes, this is a Hobbit-inspired window. I'm in my Hobbit hole as we speak. So I'm a social selling wizard. And I'm slightly obsessed with humanizing social media and guiding people to discover their true voice. I help them to unlock their digital destinies and attain their full potential. I run a company called 𝗕𝗵𝗆𝗆, and I'm building a little community out as a side project for that as well.
I have had the privilege of visiting that community. It's an amazing place. And what you mentioned a few seconds ago around discovering your story really goes as to the heart of the conversations that we like to have here at the Myth Slayer Café. Today's conversation is going to focus on the legendary, foundational even, mythical hero, Theseus. Theseus is the slayer of the Minotaur. A little bit of a backdrop here. On the island of Crete, the king, Minos, and his wife had a child that had the head of a man-eating bull, complete with fangs. And then the body was of a human, hypermuscular, terrifying. This monster, the Minotaur, had to be kept away from the population of Crete, otherwise Minos wouldn't have had any subjects to rule. So they built a labyrinth underneath his palace in Crete and then trapped the Minotaur in there. Now, the Minotaur still had to be fed, so what Minos did is engage in a bunch of wars with neighboring city-states, one of which was Athens, and he defeated Athens. Athens, as part of the terms of their defeat, had to send a group of young men and women by boat from mainland Greece to the island of Crete every like 7 or 9 years, I think, and then they would be fed to the Minotaur as a ritual matter. The hero Theseus, who was actually the child of the king of Athens, had been sent away when he was a child. He came back to Athens. He had pulled a sword from a stone that proved that he was the rightful heir to kingship in Athens and volunteered to be on the next ship of young people that were going to Crete to be sacrificed to the Minotaur. Once he got to Crete, there was a gigantic robot named 𝗕𝗺 that was guarding the island. He, being Theseus, got to the castle. The daughter of the king, Ariadne, fell in love with Theseus. Together they plotted with the genius who had built the labyrinth to create a magic ball of yarn. And Theseus went down into this labyrinth with this magic ball of yarn that tracked his steps into the center of the labyrinth. He went at midnight when the Minotaur was sleeping, and he was able to instantly kill the snoring loudly Minotaur. Then he was able to use that yarn to get back out of the labyrinth and back up to the castle. He gathered the other Athenian youths as well as Ariadne, ran in the middle of the night to the boat. 𝗕𝗺 had been charged with throwing gigantic stones at any ship that attempted to leave. And so they managed to get into the ship and away before 𝗕𝗺 could really effectively throw his stones. Now, there had been an agreement between Theseus and the king of Athens that if Theseus managed to kill the Minotaur, he would hoist a white sail at the top of the ship, and that would let the Athenian king know and the king's name was 𝗂𝗎us, that Theseus had been successful in his quest, sort of caught up in his infatuation with Ariadne and the action and the adrenaline and everything that was going on. Theseus forgot to do this. The king 𝗂𝗎us saw these black sails, and as it was approaching Athens, he jumped off a cliff in despair into the ocean, and that's how the sea around Greece came to be known as the Aegean Sea. Nonetheless, Theseus was welcomed back and became the basically hero who was responsible for and justified the emergence of Athens as a central kingdom and a preeminent city-state within Greece. If there's anyone that can begin to help us wrap our minds around what this means from a leadership, business, professional transformation perspective, and from a story perspective, it is you, Nick. So why does this unbelievable story resonate with you?
It's part of a kind of personal journey I've probably been on over the past maybe 5 years, kind of self-discovery really. It's a classic kind of trope, isn't it? The going down into the cave to kind of battle the dragon, and the labyrinth is a big, scary, dark place that you'll get lost in. But at the center of that, you can find yourself in that. Yeah, there's a lot of I think a lot of Jungian psychology that's at play with that as well. So obviously the Minotaur represents things like our primal fear, our unconscious, the unknown, and the parts of ourselves that we're probably afraid to kind of look at. And that really resonates with me. I think it probably resonates with a lot of people as well. It's like the big scary parts of yourself that you're afraid to face, and the bits where it's I always say it's there's a reason why dragons guard gold. It's that's where the good stuff is, but it's scary. It's scary to go there and look at that stuff. So.
Wow, I'd honestly never thought about the symbolism of dragons that way, but that's actually a fair point. I have to ask, what if someone is watching this show and says, well, look, I'm smart. You're in the UK. I went to Oxford or Cambridge or some other equivalent school, or in the United States, it might be an Ivy League institution or Stanford. I got good grades there. I work reasonably hard, and I am naturally someone that people look up to due to my intelligence and my accomplishments as a leader. I don't see why I have to go through all of this sort of stuff in order to achieve. If it's me personally, with everything that I've been through, other people may have to fight those dragons or go to the labyrinth, but I'm not going to have to. What would you say to that sort of person?
Where some of the best stuff is it's not external, it's internal. I used to really highly favour and prize IQ over EQ, but as I've gotten older, I've realised that the real battle is won with EQ and emotional intelligence, and we don't get that by not understanding who we are and what we react to and what we're triggered by. And there's a lot of work that goes into that, which is way more important than the external kind of learning process stuff, I think, and especially from a leadership perspective. If you can understand how you operate and how you function, it's much easier to work with other people, definitely.
What got you to make that transition from a IQ focused thinking state about what is an ingredient for success versus an EQ centric thinking state about how one can really make it in this world?
I've always been fairly kind of cerebral, and I love learning, but I think a lot of my early, as you know from my own personal story, I've experienced trauma when I was younger, and that informed a lot of my kind of psychological makeup and how I kind of viewed the world. And then I had quite a big breakdown during COVID, and I also joined a local community here called 𝗕𝗵𝗸𝗲𝗲𝗏, which is very similar to Mankind in the States.
Yeah, Mankind Project.
So fairly kind of similar process, but yeah, going through that process and being around other men that are much more emotionally in tune with themselves and much more authentic because of it was it was eye-opening. It was probably one of the most I think when I'm on my deathbed, the three things I remember is when my kids were born, when I got married, and going on that 𝗙𝗵𝗸𝗆 𝗏 weekend. It was it was a transformational experience. That weekend for me was my going into the maze. It was
I want to really talk a little bit more about Band of Brothers and Mankind Project. I did in the United States through the Mankind Project in 2019 what's called, I think, a gateway experience. And essentially what they do is they bring together a group of men that are looking to develop as leaders and more tightly focus on their own mission. They literally put them through a myth-based initiation. It really was something that played into a element of myth and of legend that we somehow seem to have lost, I feel, in modern leadership, particularly vis-a-vis men, which is this idea of ritual, sacrifice, rebirth, and initiation. Band of Brothers, I'm sort of gathering, may have had some elements like this, and really the story of Theseus is, among other things, an initiation story. He was initiated into kinghood, like you suggested, by being able to slay this monster in the labyrinth and then make his way home and own his mistakes. By the way, he had to make mistakes, like not putting up that sail. Talk to me a little bit about why you, if you even agree with what I've just said as something that's lost, that's important, and then to what extent that has impacted your own leadership journey. Because anyone who follows you on LinkedIn, and we'll get to where people can follow you on LinkedIn if someone doesn't look in the captions beneath this, you are a leader. You have a community. You've, to all external appearances, gone through that and emerged something else.
I don't think it's a process you can describe to a person that hasn't gone through it, and both you and me have had that shared experience. So that's where our commonality is, and it's it's an extremely deep, moving experience. Like I grew up in a family where you weren't kind of really emotionally present, and it was there wasn't much grief expressed. It usually came out as things like anger. So to be around a lot of men that are, to stand in a circle of 60 men and have 60 dudes around you all crying, that's like, whoa, like what's going on here? Like this is but it's normal. It's normal, and all those parts of that process, like the grief rituals, that bit to me is the bit where you're kind of going down into that cave, into the maze. That's the hardest part of that weekend of kind of confronting your demons, your dragons, your minotaurs, whatever you want to call them, the bits of yourself you're afraid to look at. And I would encourage anyone that wants to improve as a person to kind of go through some part of that process. We use a lot of Jungian mythology and Joseph Campbell's kind of hero journey, but that death and kind of rebirth cycle is important. Kind of let stuff go and come out changed. The other side is important. And I mean, as well as I do, like the especially with the young men that go on that and go through that process, they come to you and they come over the threshold, and they won't look you in the eye. They'll look down at the floor. They kind of mumble. They stutter. And then by the end of that weekend, they're stood there with their shoulders back, kind of looking you square in the eye. And it is the most powerful, magical, transformational thing I've ever done as a human being. It's incredible.
I'll never forget the morning after the main set of activities. There was a gathering of the men that were part of the cohort that I was engaged with, who did, if I recall right, a sunrise ritual. And as the leader of the circle went through that ritual and we each engaged in it, as you're describing, I couldn't stop crying. It wasn't even at that point tears of grief. It wasn't even tears of joy. It was more like tears of connection, of having finally gone through and felt what it was to have my soul begin to emerge as part of the man that I would be in the future. And it was something that I was reluctant to go into this program because I felt like, it's unmanly to do so. I was raised like you in one of these families where you have to, it was stoic. The only emotion you could express was anger and all that sort of stuff. Eventually, some friends of mine basically forced me to take it. What made you decide that this was a step that you wanted to take? How did you say to yourself, how were you able to get yourself to say, this is something I need to try?
I'd kind of acknowledged the trauma part. I think when my daughter was born, I remember when she was born, I think I cried for about 3 days straight. And I said to myself, I'm going to kind of, I want to be a better father. So I looked into that process and I was like, I'm just not ready to do this now. And then when my son came, I was like, okay, I'm ready and I'm going to do this. And that was probably, I don't know, probably 4 years ago now. That I've been through that process, but yeah, it has impacted every single facet of my life, my relationship with my wife, my children, my business, the freaking office that I'm in now. I've built this office. This is, to me, is a sacred space. So I built this office with the directions that we use in a band of brothers. So north is that way, which is my sovereign. So that's where my video equipment is. East is that way, which is the lover, which is my garden. South is that way, which is the warrior, which is my family. And then west is that way, which is the magician, which is where all my books and stuff are. So I actually built this. I built this studio with that in mind. So it's when I say it's kind of part of the DNA of who I am, and even the archetypes that I use in the community that I built as well, the wizards, the warriors, and the elves, they came from that. It's all come from that.
Which goes back to your original statement in the introduction, finding your voice. One of the things that is truly awesome about you, again, anyone who watches this needs to follow you on LinkedIn and go to your website because you will truly see what I'm talking about. You have found and express your voice in a way that is unlike any, and I mean any other person in your space, probably on the entire planet. And I am not exaggerating. I think that when people research you, they will understand exactly why I say this with extreme confidence. How did you come then to the place? And I understand you went through the Band of Brothers experience and it transformed you, but okay, how were you able to take that into a presentation that is so singular? Because that's also scary. A lot of people tend to define success as having that not an office that is built per this quartet of great masculine archetypes, but according to the best layout on the floor of the building that they're in, the niceness of the suits that they wear, the car that they drive, or the amount of luxury, the watches, of the luxury goods that they have. You're presenting yourself and your story in a way that has nothing to do with that at all. What happened? How were you able to step into that?
The things that I've been building, there were moments where I genuinely thought I'd lost my mind, where I thought I've gone so far to the edge of what I think is kind of acceptable or like when I was building this stuff, especially even the community, I was like, are people going to get it? Are they going to turn up? Are they going to understand what it is I'm building? But there's a certain amount of like definitely a kind of leap of faith and a certain amount of bravery you have to have with doing that stuff. And I think going through that process kind of taught me that, especially like it sounds really morbid, but I've been thinking a lot about death recently, because we're at that kind of stage of the cycle of the year, I guess, where we kind of cross over into winter. And death is a really important reminder that we get so kind of emotionally invested in what ifs, or fear keeps us back from, what if I don't try this thing, or what if that happens, and it's like, you're going to die one day, you're going to die, and none of it will matter. So why be afraid? Why be scared when because everything falls away in the face of that. You are going to die one day. It's a great reminder to just take your trunks off and go 2 feet into the pool. Just dive in, because it's gonna what's the worst that's gonna happen is my
People might say in response to that, what's the worst that's going to happen? I won't have any money. I won't be able to provide for my family if you're a male, or if you're a single woman for that matter, or people will laugh at me, or people will think that I'm weird. How did you, nonetheless, you said you had a leap of faith, but still, like, you present yourself, for instance, as a wizard with a crystal ball that you're cackling over in a way that's like sort of fun, but also kind of like, ha ha ha, that spell might be on me. Or you have yourself literally in knight's armor, putting out there on a professional platform like LinkedIn. This is what if someone says, I can't be that bold, Nick?
A lot of the people that I work with are very like me. They're very nerdy, very good at what they do. They're experts at what they do. They're very, technically very proficient people. But the thing they struggle with the most is being themselves, is being their whole self, and it's that component of it that attracts people to you. I've used it a lot, but there's a Steve Jobs quote, and he didn't actually say it, but his daughter overheard him say it. So he's not been directly quoted as saying it, but he said that it's not love that brings people together; it's values, shared values. So when you're putting yourself out there as you're sharing your value sets, and it creates an overlap with other people. Other people go, I see myself in you. You are like me, and that's where we can start to do business. So we think, or we're conditioned to think, that as humans, that if we start to stand out, we will peel away from the status quo and will be ostracized from the group. But the opposite is true. When you start to do that, people look up to you and go, well, I'd like to be like you because you're being brave and you're being yourself. It's I definitely think I don't think I would have been able to do this if I hadn't built a community on LinkedIn and had the support of people, because you have people there kind of empowering you and kind of, sort of championing you to do this stuff. So you build a community of people around you which support you in order to kind of take those leaps, I think, which is it makes it easier.
That being said, and this is important for anyone who is watching this show thinking about really emerging as a high-level leader, particularly a thought leader within any space, having an online presence, having the ability to stand out in a sea of sameness of other people that are trying to show themselves as somehow distinctive in their leadership message or in their presence or personality, right? Going as far as you have can seem particularly to put one at risk of ostracization, which can have financial implications. When I first started to go online, I had kind of a unique look, but I didn't have a unique message. It was kind of based around resilience and motivation. So what? And yet I still was able to build an audience, I think to some extent just based on personality and whatever skills I brought into the room. When I first decided to lean into my version of what you do, the Myth Slayer persona, I actually had a catastrophic drop in engagement. I did feel kind of ostracized. I still haven't gone back because the right people were attracted to me. Ultimately, they found me. But the lesson I learned from that, and I'd be curious to your thoughts on, is, well, a lot of those people, sometimes it's good to be ostracized. But I was like, I don't want to be associated with you.
There is no point in being. There's a Mr. Miyagi quote from Karate Kid, which always sticks in my mind, and he's like, if Daniel-san walk in road, walk on left side fine, walk on right side fine, walk in middle, get squashed like grape. So it's like pick a side and kind of go all in. Otherwise, if you're just kind of playing it safe and going for the kind of vanilla approach, you're not gonna attract the people that are like you and want to work with you. And it can be extremely terrifying to do that. And not everyone is. I'm a very extreme example, I think, of where you can kind of go with this stuff, and not everyone is going to do that, and nor should you, nor should you have to. But a large component of this is being yourself, like your myth, your story, that the all of the things that make up you as a human being they're impossible to reproduce from someone else, because only, like, the odds of you being born are 400 trillion to 1. The odds of you being, the odds of us sitting here having this conversation right now are astronomical. So you are unique. All of us are unique, and when you lean into that uniqueness, that's what creates your differentiation. A lot of people find it difficult or struggle to kind of identify kind of who they are and how they want to show up in the world, and that's it kind of makes me sad.
And I will say, if you weren't so extreme or unique, the person who introduced us would never have been motivated to do so. And I have found meeting you to be an unbelievably rewarding experience. And then the extreme people that I've got to know through following you on LinkedIn, and for all I know, you may have also come across some extreme people that follow me, right? Hey, we're having a grand old time being extreme together.
I think I mentioned it before we started the show, but you actually gave me the inkling of the idea when you started doing the Myth Slayer stuff and kind of leaning into the branding, because there was I produced a lot of training, and I started to kind of build on this idea of kind of building my own kind of mythos and story, and I was like, what if I take what I do and kind of smush it together with what I loved as a kid, which was fantasy and Lord of the Rings and all that kind of stuff, and then boom, I created this whole new world basically to kind of play around and build a community off it, build products off the back of it, and it was you that gave me, partly inspired me to have the courage to do that, dude. So thank you. I get to thank you and say thank you for that.
That's unbelievable. And when I look at what you do, all I have to say is, wow, if I could inspire something like that, then that's what doing this is all about, because you've utterly taken it next level and are clearly having fun, which goes as to something else I wanted to ask you about, because one of the things that you clearly convey in everything that you do is a sense of fun. As I was first emerging in leadership, I couldn't help but think about a Bible quote that I had been raised on, which was more or less, I know I'm going to get it kind of wrong, but when you're a child, you play with childish things. When you're an adult, you leave the childish things behind and you play, or you live in that space. For those of you that are religious fundamentalists, which you probably aren't if you're watching this show, you may have a problem with what I'm about to say, but I think that little piece of biblical advice was wrong. Right, you're talking about how, and I say this to my own clients, part of discovering who you are is stepping into childhood and looking at the things that you thought were cool. It might have been Star Trek, it might have been the Lord of the Rings, which I love too, by the way, or Dungeons and Dragons, or car racing, or anime, or whatever. Was it hard for you to sort of get yourself into that place where you were bringing out the child? Do you feel like joy? How do you feel that plays out for you as a leader? Because I used to think, joy isn't what it's about. It's about being responsible and making sure that those metrics are met, and this, that, and the other. Bam.
There's a kind of dichotomy there, isn't there? Of we're encouraged to act like adults and all the rest of it, but inside each of us is a small person with adult body armor on, if you will. And my TED talk that I did recently was around the power of play. I think a lot of my secret sauce is encouraging adults to think like children and play, because when you're playing, you're having fun, you're learning, but it doesn't feel like learning. It's the learning goes in much deeper. And play is super important for your sense of identity. It's really important for your business in terms of creativity, and play creates a space where you can be fearless as well. Think about how kids don't, like, they'll have a go when they're playing, they'll try and find an answer to something, and they don't care what, they're not scared, and it's almost the opposite mentality with a lot of businesses. They won't take risks, they're risk averse, and we need a space where we can take risk and we can do these crazy things, and play facilitates that. It creates that space where we can do that stuff. So yeah, I think play is super important, especially in adults, and it's a very serious subject here. It sounds like it's this kind of frivolous throwaway thing, but even Pixar do it. So Pixar have kind of away days where their team and staff members all get together and they play. That they might do like ballet lessons, or they might do sculpture, or like clay molding and stuff like that, because it creates a sense of, basically all of the adults in the room regress to being kids again, and they all play and they all have fun and they all integrate, and there's no hierarchy, and it's a super important way of how they run their business. And Pixar is a phenomenally successful company, so there's got to be something in that.
We also talk a lot more about this in an episode with a guest named Mark Williams that I pull from play. And again, I'm curious as to your thoughts on, which is hope. Going back to the theme of Theseus, a lot of why these stories appeal to us, the legendary ones that you focus on from, sort of the sword and sorcery era, or the mythical ones that I focus on, right? They have all of these cool things. Theseus had Talos, the robot, right? Or the Minotaur himself, or this castle with a labyrinth beneath it and magic yarn, all these sort of very fantastical, dramatic things that are triggers of imagination and that represent sort of thinking outside of the box, but they also have within them, depending on how the story plays out, and Theseus is a great example of this, that kernel of hope. And part of what I see lacking in a world without play, this goes into the Mark Williams episode, which is about hope, is there can be no space for hope if you're not willing to go into a play-like or childlike space, because you mentioned earlier seasons in life and death. Well, what does childhood represent really? What is the outlook of a child? It's rooted in hope and possibility of the future.
Kind of springtime of your life, isn't it? It's where you can experiment and play and have fun, and then we get to a certain point where that kind of gets. I was a really big fan. He sadly passed away now, but of Sir Ken Robinson, who's one of my favourite TED Talks of all time. Is his "The Schools Kill Creativity," where he talks about how each person has a kind of unique spark, and it's our life's work to really kind of find out what that is, and how we can leverage it and use it. And that kind of gets beaten out of us by the school system. It gets beaten out of us through career and work, and I think if a lot more companies kind of start to tap into people's intrinsic talents, there'd be a lot more successful company, rather than trying to get those people to fit what the company needs, maybe exploring and opening up what their talents are and how they can uniquely help that company. So kind of turning it on its head a little bit. And there's definitely an element of play in that. It's and I think like we kind of covered this briefly, but I think the whole like the advent of AI I think that's gonna start to deepen human relationships more. I think it's going to create this kind of seesaw effect where we're already in an era where things are more kind of synthetic, and as we get more and more synthetic and stuff gets less and less real, that people are going to look for more real experiences.
I'm glad that you raised that, because it was an area that I did want us to begin to dive in a little bit more deeply. I'll just recontextualize it for just a minute before we get to your point, which I view as radical, and I think most people would likely view in this time and place as, at best, counterintuitive, if not at worst hard to take in at all. But let me go to that recontextualization. You mentioned that you went into the visual space that you have, as well as the branding space that you have, tied into this, again, legendary, medieval, magical, sword and sorcery, Gandalfish sort of place, by mushing together a bunch of things that you liked as in your childhood, and then putting it with your business after you had gone through a journey in which you dealt with the trauma or the dragons within that you had to slay. And I mention all of that because what came out of it, as we've also discussed a little bit earlier, was a presentation and a message and a community that is genuinely unique. Part of why I went into the Myth Slayer persona myself, I won't speak for you, you can speak to you, I'm quite sure, but is that I wanted to make sure that not only was I not replicable elsewhere, so that my intellectual property could be preserved, so that people would remember me, so that I would attract the right people, so that my values would be represented, like you talked about earlier, but also because it's my thought that the less and less differentiated you are, the further and further away you are from a creative space, the easier and easier and easier it is for AI to replace you.
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about AI replacing people, and then how then we can square that away with your idea of AI connecting people more. Because it seems to me, if that's true, what we just said about it potentially displacing people, that leads to more and more alienation. How do you square those two lines of thinking together?
Balance in all things, and I think the AI seesaw is tipping stuff the other way. We've seen it kind of with the first wave of kind of social media, and now we're moving into more of an AI driven space, that the world is becoming more and more synthetic and less real, and people will, there needs to be balance in that. People will want deeper, and I've spoken to a lot of people about this, and they agree, they will want deeper human connection and real relationships and real depth to things, and that's something not yet that you can create. We're not at the level yet where we can create that with them. It may happen eventually with AI, and I worry slightly about the world, what the world will look like when it does happen. But I don't think you can effectively replace that level of kind of human relationship and depth and story and emotion that you get from being around other human beings. It's a large part of what I've tried to do with my community, is actually bring in a real sense of community and values and togetherness, and I want to try and bring that over into the real world as well, and bring people together into the real world. It's an interesting space, but I think the rate at which all of that stuff's changing is you'll see you'll see a rejection of that, and you'll see a kind of splintering of that, where people go, no, this is not, and I think maybe it's a generational shift as well. I mean, we're of I'm assuming you're Gen X, are you?
I'm only 26. How's that for a myth?
Oh, dude. Yeah.
Yes, I'm Gen X. I confess.
I had a conversation with a good friend of mine today, actually, and about how we are. If you look at the kind of boomer generation, they grew up, in a tech-free world. We're the first generation that kind of had a foot in both camps. So we've grown up with technology. We understand the applications of it, but we knew a world pre-technology. And we understand how to build relationships and actually how to connect. Whereas my daughter's generation, they've grown up, they're digital natives. They kind of expect this stuff, and they've grown up and they don't know how it works. It's just a thing that's there, and it does what it's supposed to do, and that's how they talk to their friends. But our generation traverses both sides of that, and I think that's why we can see the benefits and negative aspects of AI, and I think there'll be a middle ground with this as well. I think people that don't leverage it will fall behind. Businesses that don't leverage it will fall behind. Businesses that rely on it completely for automation and building out kind of synthetic versions of maybe team members and leaning too heavily on that side of stuff will lose as well. I think there's a middle ground with this where you're offsetting some of the more menial tasks, but there's still a human element to it. And I came across a video the other day, and it really resonated with me actually, where this guy, the kind of buzzword or headline was trust is the new SEO, which really kind of stood out for me, because that's as things get more and more synthetic and less real, we need to develop more and more trust. So trust is becoming a commodity.
It's fascinating. Okay, Nick, you're the first person I'm telling this to. Last night I went on ChatGPT and I put into it a bunch of photos of myself, branding photos, and photos of me speaking here and there. And I asked it some questions saying, this person, draw some conclusions about it. So one of the things I asked, I'll be honest, does this man have a hot ass?
What was the response from ChatGPT?
It was so ChatGPT. It said, it's very difficult to assess whether someone thinks someone has a quote unquote hot ass.
Love it.
And then it gave, these are the characteristics that some people find sexually attractive. We can't tell a lot about this man's ass from the photo, but it seems at least possible that he might have had a hot ass. Right. And then I asked it some other questions, and I was like, well, what can you tell about this man from the photos? And one of the things that it said was, this man in this photo has probably had a difficult life, but has overcome obstacles. And then I asked her, what does this man's voice sound like? And it said, based on the physical characteristics, his voice is probably somewhat deep, probably resonant and confident. So I was like, okay, this is all vaguely scary. Maybe the voice stuff I could explain, but I was particularly disturbed by this man has had a hard life, because I have had a hard life. I asked why I thought that, and it said, well, because he dresses in a way that's bold. He has an unusual hairstyle. He is projecting the image of someone that's counter to authority, and someone who's counter to authority probably has not had the easiest existence in the world. And then that gets me thinking, well, how much really can individuality be out there if ChatGPT is able to figure out everything from whether I might have a hot ass to what my voice is like to what my life has been like?
A good book by I can never pronounce the author's name properly, so I'm not going to attempt to try. But he's written 2 books. I think he's just written a 3rd book actually. So Homo sapiens was his first book about the history of humanity up to this point, and then Homo 𝗙𝗵𝗆𝗆 was the book of his that I've read. I think I've read it about 3 times now. I listened to it on audiobook, where he kind of explains that humans are algorithms essentially. We're extremely and incredibly complex algorithms, but we're still algorithms. So once the data sets are there and the algorithms can understand us, you might as well hand yourself over to the algorithm. You think about we all wear wearable tech. It's tracking our heart rate, our movement, all that stuff. These algorithms eventually going to tell us who to have sex with, who to hang out with, what relationships to foster, what food to eat, when to exercise. So it's almost like the algorithms are becoming the new. I think he calls them the dataists, but it's algorithms and data sets are the new religion essentially. It's like you just hand yourself over to the data sets. But it's definitely going to be interesting, if nothing else.
Yeah, definitely. Now, we connected and both emerged in the LinkedIn space during something that you obliquely and very briefly mentioned before, which was the COVID pandemic. We have not explicitly on this show yet talked about the role of the COVID pandemic, both in the acceleration of AI, the ability to connect, shifting expectations about how we can present to the world, right? Like, I kind of think you and I might not have been able to get away with how we're presenting had not some of the shifting professional norms that came through the COVID pandemic changed things. AI. Look, even podcasting and remote applications like Riverside FM, which is what we're recording this on, really came into their own during the COVID pandemic. While at the same time, every generation that went through this was in one way or another traumatized, but particularly some of the ones that are beneath us, well, beneath my Gen X. Talk to me a little bit about how you think this will all play out in terms of where we move as brand differentiators, as thought leaders, and as people who are either connected or not.
We're going to get to a point where people, part of the interview process will be what's your follower count and what's your your engagement rates and metrics with your content. That will be part of the discussion kind of going forward. But we're definitely in a period of history where I don't even know over the next 10 to 20 years with the advent of AI. I am convinced. I did a post about it the other day that I am convinced that someone somewhere on the planet will build a $1 billion turnover one-person business because of the advent of AI, because they're now able to leverage tools and build, like, you've got no-code websites, you can build apps, you can build websites purely just from your imagination. You don't need to have any coding knowledge, so think of the speed and scale that you can now. Is part of the reason I got out of video production in the first place, because everyone has one of these in their pocket. So everyone can create content. The gap between the democratization and the gap between idea to inception is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, to the point where anything that we can imagine, which is the singularity, anything that we can imagine, we can create. So I think at some point we will see that. We will see a world first in a person that creates a $1 billion turnover one-person business because of the structure. And I've got some crazy theories on this. I think that
I want to hear them.
I think that the brands of the future won't be brands as we know them. They will be communities. They will be hives of places where these companies have a set of principles and values, and employees are attracted to come and work for them. And there won't necessarily be employees as we know them. They will be, gig economy workers or freelancers. They will come and work for that brand based on the values that they align with the values of that community. So I think we're going to see a shift in the way. I mean, even if you look at the traditional models of the way businesses are run, you have sales departments, you have marketing departments, you have the C-suite, you have human resources. How much of those will change because of the democratization and the way? I think the way that we're creating content and we're kind of driving business, how that's going to affect employees kind of moving forward. I don't know. I honestly don't know what the world's going to look like in 10, 20 years, but it's definitely going to be interesting.
Well, but the implications of that from a leadership perspective are profound because, for instance, let me just talk about it this way. If you are able to be an entrepreneur or a gig worker, freelancer or whatever, and you're able to produce quality content and drive engagement, whether it's for the client or the quote unquote employer that you have or for yourself, let's say you are that first solopreneur trillion-dollar business, right? Your margins are going to dramatically increase. So the opportunity for building wealth as well as influence and impact move forward for the right people. But let's say you're a leader who's been pretty much a bean counter, or you are an organizer that's not at the high level, but like, let's say you're a manager level organizer who, right, is really good at putting widgets here and there within that particular system. Or you are someone who's like a good, I don't know, a document proofreader or something like that AI can already do, right? Like those sorts of, but let's ignore the document reader. Let's talk about leaders themselves that are more technocrats. Those can get promoted pretty high, even end up CEOs of organizations under the model that you're talking about. That idea of someone as a technocrat, quote unquote, leader, that may go the way of the Minotaur.
Yeah, nicely brought back there. But I think, I think like look at the rise of. I think two industries will be huge over the next couple of decades. One will be robotics, and two will be AI. Oh, I always forget that it does that. And yeah, you think about kind of like menial tasks, like kind of shelf stacking. If there's robots in stores doing all the shelf stacking, what's going to happen to that labor force? We're gonna have to have some kind of basic universal income. It's going to be like Star Trek. Everyone's going to need a certain level of money to live. And there's another book which I can't remember the name of, which a friend of mine recommended to me to read, which he said in it. If you look at the kind of free market capitalism, it's based on the fact that I can create this widget over here for half the price and sell it for twice as much. But when you bring AI into the equation and algorithms into the equation, it starts to stabilize and becomes balanced. So there's no more efficiency. We reach peak efficiency, and then what happens? What happens to the economy when we reach peak efficiency, when the machines and the algorithms have worked out like the optimal amount of efficiency with what we can do? Everything becomes stable.
It also goes then to as a interesting potential class stratification. I won't get as much into UBI because I just don't have the economics background to really. I mean, although my instinct is like, yeah, UBI is almost certainly going to have to happen if this trajectory occurs, because there's no other way to be sustainable. But then, okay, let's say we have UBI or some system in which the majority of people live. Now, will the majority of people choose to go beyond that? Will sort of a 𝗙𝗈-ish sort of dystopia emerge in which a lot of people on geeky, cool, but mythic stories, and I do consider 𝗙𝗈 a modern myth of that level, right? A cautionary myth, but very much a myth, right? Like Icarus, who went with his father out of the labyrinth. His father was a man who made the labyrinth, and Icarus.
One of the choices, my son's first name was Icarus, but we didn't.
Really? That would have been a pretty badass name to have, though. I love that. But in any event, right? Like, okay, so we could have a dystopia where everyone is just sitting around living on their UBI and enjoying content, or maybe enjoying connection with other people.
And I like to think that it will be a bit like Star Trek. So the robots will be doing all the heavy lifting stuff, looking after us, while we'll be off creating, poetry, art, mountain climbing, doing all the stuff we're supposed to be doing as human beings. But that's my
but yeah, and then that goes back to our discussion though about hope. Right, because that's a very optimistic view of the future, that's what people will do. The cynic might say the majority will be sitting around watching their screens or glued to a modern version of TV or holodecks, while a minority of people will step into the new requirements of leadership and be this overlord class. Now, this overlord class may look different than it does now, require different skills. I hope it requires my skills. But that's sort of where I go into my next question to you, which is Theseus and his like. Theseus could have just stayed in his backwoods hometown and lived a perfectly normal life, but he felt a call to go into Athens. He then felt a call to volunteer to go on this ship to Crete and sacrifice himself potentially to the Minotaur, and therefore emerged as something different. Do you feel that if this AI world were to come forward and you were to get UBI or your other economic needs met, Nick, that you would still be a creator? Would you be like, good, I don't have to do all this shit?
Yes, because I love doing it. I feel personally most alive when I'm creating stuff, when I'm making stuff, when I'm building stuff. And I think that's an important function of what it means to be a human being. So when that gets kind of when that gets taken away from us or removed from the human equation, I think that's a large part of being human. So I would question what that's going to entail in the future. But I mean, both of us, neither of us are qualified to even start to talk about this stuff. But it's definitely the amount of the curve and the rate and the amount of disruption we're going to see over the next 10 to 20 years is going to be phenomenal. It's going to be I have no idea how it's going to affect industry. No idea.
And even if neither of us are the experts on it, as a leadership-oriented interview show, we need to at least touch on it and encourage those that are watching to begin to be cognizant of that. I don't see how we could responsibly be leaders ourselves if we're not thinking about the future. Again, sort of approaching it with that attitude of possibility and consideration of that going forward.
We talk a lot about kind of story and myth, and those things are, I think they're intrinsic to the human experience, and to kind of, there's something about being human that means, like, exploring and adapting and evolving and changing, and it's all part of the human condition. So I think things kind of move in cycles, and I think with that proliferation of AI and the introduction of it, that people, as I said, will want deeper, richer, more meaningful human experiences. So maybe it may create, subcultures or markets where people go back to, I don't know, like things like kind of sculpture or woodwork or things like that are kind of slightly a bit rough around the edges or chaotic, are valued more because they're human, they're human made.
Stepping into the underworld, into the labyrinth, which is itself a place of darkness, as you mentioned earlier, and chaos, is, to the minds of many, including myself, and again, as you've suggested earlier in the conversation, related to the ability to truly emerge as a individual voice and a creator that's connected to story. I have one last question related to that. I'll share a brief anecdote before we get into it to explain it. So, those who watch the show know that about a year ago, I caught a mysterious illness that was caused by some unknown pathogen, and that it was deeply traumatic since it came out of nowhere, almost killed me. And then, I gradually healed, but no one knows what this was. And so as part of my healing from that trauma, I did a shaman facilitated 𝗙𝘁 magic mushroom journey, which I've also discussed elsewhere on this show. And one of the things that happened in that was I went into this facilitated journey doing something called intention setting. In other words, basically I had a question or an issue that I wanted resolved that was the focal point of this journey, which was to be shown my light. And at one point I saw in the left-hand bottom corner of my field of vision a black hole. And I was like, oh, maybe at the center of this black hole, there is my light. And so I dived into it, and I dived deeper and deeper. And in that black hole, I was expressing verbally what I was experiencing with my shaman. I started to cry because I felt every bit of pain from every trauma that I'd had in my life. And I acknowledged how bad some of that trauma was. And I kept going deeper and deeper because I thought the deeper I went, the more likely I would be to find my life and my light. At least until the shaman said, Scott, you need to leave this place. And I was like, no, if I go clear to the center, I'll find my light. He said, you need to leave it now. And so he and I together pulled the part of me that was on this journey away from it. Why do I share that anecdote, Nick? Because I wonder sometimes, in fact, I know, that there can be a fear that people have who are in leadership positions or who are just on their professional or personal journey, that if they go into the labyrinth and as they move closer and closer to the center to kill the Minotaur, he'll completely devour them. What do you say to those people?
That's the scary part of doing this and going through that process. It's the most challenging thing I think any human being can do, is to look at their own stuff, because nobody's perfect. We all carry baggage and shadows and stuff that we'd rather not talk about, and behaviors that we maybe exhibit that we'd prefer that weren't there. And that's the stuff that's challenging, that's difficult to do. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it. But I think a lot of people don't. They're not willing to confront that stuff or even start to look at that process because it's scary. As you just described it, and it sounds obvious to me, but it's like if I go there, a part of me or a part of who I am is going to die, and I'm going to leave that behind maybe, and I'm going to come out of that process different and change somehow. And it's like, will I? I think that scares people more than the prospect of like, well, I know who I am and I'm comfortable with this. Whereas, going through that process, there's a Marianne Williamson quote that I love, and I always butcher it, so I won't attempt to quote her properly. But she says, "It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us the most. That we will be successful and incredible and amazing, but we'd rather, like, the status quo is fine. We know that we understand failure. We understand that's comfortable, that's safe. But growth, change, adaptation, that's freaky, that's scary."
I can't help but note that as we've had this conversation, and as you, Nick, have taken us on an incredible emotional, intellectual, even spiritual journey, that the light outside of the window on your side of the Myth Slayer Café has gone more dark. But that's because we've gone on the journey together. And I feel that by talking about these subjects, I've become a different sort of leader. I'll be thinking about things differently. And understanding that ability to really tap into thinking about what is beyond the things that scare us tomorrow, saying creativity, that ability to connect, may be what enables leaders like me, or especially like you, to be able to prosper. Right? That's perhaps the most impactful takeaway that I've had from this entire really twisted, multi-dimensional, rabbit hole-filled, labyrinthine conversation. Nick, if there is any single takeaway that you would like to leave with the audience, or that you would like to express that you haven't had a chance to so far, please share.
I think the future of industry and the future of everything is community. So if you think about the actual myth itself, Theseus risked his life to save his people. So it's about the sacrifices for the greater good, and to me that is an intrinsic part of community. It's like I'm kind of a bit kind of tired, I guess, from this notion of kind of collective individualism that we have, and I feel that we're moving back to a state where community is important, and it's not about us, it's about the people around us and how we can support them and nurture them, and that's essentially what Theseus was doing in that story. He was sacrificing himself to save his people. And that to me is the epitome of what a community is or should be.
I love it when the guest truly has the last word. Nick, how can people find out more about you, and what do you have going on that you want to share with us?
Best place to find me really is on LinkedIn. You can't miss my profile if you do a search for that social nerd. And yeah, I've got a lovely little community that I like nerdy experts to hang out in and find out more about, and you can go and check my profile out for that. And it has been an absolute honour and a pleasure to hang out with you for the past hour, Scott. Thank you.
The Myth Slayer Café will never be the same. So, for those of you who enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out Nick's links in the caption below. And while you're looking at the caption below, be sure to press the thumbs up button. Oh, and subscribe to this channel so you can hear a lot more from guests like Nick about myths, leadership, and life generally. It has been great having you join Nick and me at the Myth Slayer Café. And between now and the next time, always remember, I want your future to be epic.